Today it is my great pleasure to introduce Jeannette Franks. She is a friend of mine, and I'm thrilled that she's joining us here today to talk about sustainable Bainbridge and weed warriors. It's an ideal time to start because the weeds are poking their heads up. So welcome, Jeannette, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Janet. I've been involved in environmental issues and plants in the Pacific Northwest all my life, although I am a PhD gerontologist. And I do think that being a green senior is important for your quality of life. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Earth Day, the whole panoply of events on Bainbridge Island for Earth Month, and as well as a few special events that I want to highlight, especially the actual Earth Day, April 22nd, which I'm calling Double Shot Green Seniors. Because although anybody can come, it's for especially people to celebrate that we've had 2 vaccines and that we are doing volunteer work to help the environment and to mitigate global warming. And it'll be right across from the Senior Center in Waterfront Park. So the very first Earth Day was in 1970. And there was a senator in Wisconsin, Michigan, one of those places, Senator Nelson from Wisconsin, who wanted to take advantage of all the enthusiasm of like university students, because we were having teach-ins and marches and protests, and he wanted to bring that energy into environmental issues. And they actually hired Dennis Hayes, a brilliant young man from Stanford who grew up in the Northwest, to spearhead this event and make it a big national event. And so I participated in the very first Earth Day in 1970 at Gasworks Park in Seattle. And it was basically a big party. It was really fun, but it was very well attended. And the whole Earth Day idea really caught on because people cared more and more about environmental issues, and events like the unbreathable smog in LA and all sorts of things were making it obvious that it was important. And by the end of 1970, the first Earth Day led to the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the passage of the very first environmental laws, the National Environmental Education Act, Occupational Safety and Health Act, and the Clean Air Act. So it was a really big impetus. And then last year, 2020, we were going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. But horrifically, COVID quelched that. And we did a very small virtual event and just tried to figure out what we were going to do next. On Bainbridge Island here, we have had an Earth Month committee meeting for years and years and planning events for April. And our theme is Celebrate Trees. And I don't know if any of you attended the environmental conference that was online. It was hosted by Islandwood, but it was the Association of Bainbridge Communities. And we had 4 consecutive Sundays with experts speaking on how it turns out I was right, that a healthy, mature forest is very important in sequestering carbon and having biodiversity instead of, for example, a sea of ivy taking down trees, which is still much of Bainbridge Island, is even more important than I had ever imagined in terms of the actual science. There's now hard research that shows how important a healthy forest is. For example, the mycelium for mushrooms, fungi, and stuff really help the health of the forest. And it used to be kind of this woo-woo, oh, the trees are talking to each other. It's much more significant than that. And now it's really based on solid academic research, which is very exciting. So there is a wonderful website, which I posted in the chat box. And actually, Sustainable Bainbridge has a huge, wonderful website. the Earth Month is down at the bottom. This will take you directly to Earth but if you just Google Sustainable Bainbridge, there's Weed Warriors, there's the Watershed Council, there's Trash and Fashion, which is coming up, which is a really fun special event. If you've never been to Trash and Fashion, that is delightful, and tickets sell out right away. But that's going to happen, and it's going to be outdoors at Hilltop under, I think, 12 or 15 different tents, each one featuring a model with their creation. So it'll be all outdoors and circulating outside. I think it'll be really fun. So the event that I'm having read is, I already mentioned to them, is going to be on the actual Earth Day, April 22nd, which is a Thursday, 11 a.m., just because that worked out for some people. And you don't have to sign up in advance. You don't even have to get really dirty. I want to highlight a new weed that we have a great deal of on the island. And I think that Daphne L'Oreali, mother of millions, might be the next Japanese knotweed. And if we can get this weed before it spreads, we will do really well. Carolyn has set up a screen share to show a picture of it. Did you have that handy, Carolyn? Because most people have never heard of it. Most people don't recognize it. And they say, oh, Daphne, I love Daphne. So here it is. And each of these blossoms under the leaves turns into a seed. And each berry turns into berries. And each berry has hundreds of seeds. So it's spreading really rapidly. It's an attractive plant. It's an escaped ornamental, holds up well in flower arrangements. Pick all you want, and it's hard to pull up. It's really a tough, sturdy plant. The whole problem with non-native, noxious, invasive weeds is that they take over more desirable plants. So, for example, where you have Daphne or Stinky Bob, do y'all know Stinky Bob? You won't have trillium. But if you get rid of, for example, Daphne or mother of millions or Stinky Bob, that's one of the reasons we have such a good show of trilliums in the ground forest. I just saw my first trilliums this week, so they are coming out. So do get out there in the ground forest on Ron Williamson's Trillium Trail, and you will see them. And they will be much more profuse and robust there than in many of the other places on the island where we still have ivy, etc. I do think that volunteer service is an important part of being a green senior and quality of life. And there's a lot of other events going on. So I'm going to mention a few of them. The beloved historic trees of Bainbridge. I don't know if you're doing a video on this or not, but instead of the outdoor usual tree tour that Olaf Ribeiro would lead people on, we're still going to highlight the most important historic trees. And so, pardon me, this is a joint senior center and historical museum virtual event on April 12th. So there'll be a nice virtual tree tour. And so this is all, I printed up the website, which of course is ridiculous because it always takes too many pages. But I think that's one of the highlights. That would be a really fun thing to do.
Right here on Monday.
Right. And we've also created a map so you can take yourself on a tree tour anytime you want. So that's an important thing as well. I thought this was hilarious. Bay Hay is doing sock recycling. This will be anytime between April 15th and May 8th. You can bring any type, any brand of socks, single or in pairs, to Bay Hay. And Smart Wool, which are the best socks. They're the only ones I've ever had that last forever, even though they cost a fortune. But you can bring them to Bay Hay, and they're going to be turning them into dog beds. I love this. So it's time to go through that sock drawer. All those drawers you thought you were going to clean during the pandemic. Oh, the spice drawer. Oh, the junk drawer. Did I do it? No. but I am going to do my sock drawer. You know, those socks that always fall down. So why are they still in your sock drawer? Anyway, I think this will be a blast. League of Women Voters is doing a whole bunch of things around plastic, which I just think is fabulous. And they're having a virtual event on April 21st on plastic, the big picture, local insights on what you can do. April 22nd is the weed pull at Waterfront Park, and we're doing a very specific area because, of course, it is shoreline, and there's a certain area, you know, that we have to be back from. So it's back from the sidewalk, basically between the two sidewalks, the sidewalk closest to the senior center and then the sidewalk down below. And you can bring your own tools, but I got plenty of extras. This is going to be fun. Kiss the Ground movie discussion. So Kiss the Ground is on Netflix, and I haven't seen it yet because it doesn't start until April 10th, which is in 2 days. But it's supposed to be a wonderful film talking about regenerating the world's soil so we can completely and rapidly stabilize Earth's climate. I'm hoping, but so you can watch it starting on the 10th, but on April 22nd, actual Earth Day at 5, there'll be a Zoom with a community discussion from the WSU Extension office. So I think that'll be really interesting. Also, there are 2 full Sundays of free invasive weed disposal. If you've ever taken a truckload of invasive plants to the dump, they charge you. And it's a fairly significant amount because they weigh it. And so from 10 to 4 on Sunday, April 18th and Sunday, April 25th, you can get free weed disposal. And it has to be an invasive weed. You cannot bring a truckload of dandelions. It has to be like Scotch broom, Himalayan blackberry, English ivy, English laurel, which a lot of people don't realize is a non-native invasive tree and really hard to get out of the ground for us. Likewise with holly, hawthorn, and all the regular villains, Stinky Bob, Mother of Millions. Oh, and I like to call it baby butterfly killer bush. Are you familiar with Buddleia, which sounds so pretty? Oh, and it's fairly attractive, briefly. It's one of those mini plants that looks really good for about 10 days. But it does attract butterflies that then lay their eggs. And when the larvae hatch, it's not edible to them and they die. So that's why it's called baby butterfly killer bush. And I had a beautiful yellow fancy one in my old yard that I had to remove because even sometimes when you get sterile hybrids, they revert or the seeds revert. So I got rid of it. But we've got lots of Buddleia, especially down by the waterfront, Pritchard Park, Eagle Harbor. It's everywhere, and it's a nasty plant.
Yeah, people like it because it seems to attract butterflies, right? But
right.
it's in fact evil.
Yes, indeed. And it kills butterflies ultimately because it kills the little baby larva. Thank you, Reed. Thank you. Because a lot of people, they say, oh, but it's so pretty. I remember not that long ago when we started really having a big campaign against Scotch broom, people would say, oh, but it's so pretty. It's a terrible plant that ruins salmon streams and invades. It's an edge plant. So a lot of our important plants, like the native rhododendron, we used to have a lot, like if you're taking that road to Silverdale, you'd round this curve and there were all of these native rhododendrons, and now it's all Scotch broom. They're gone. So it's important to teach and recognize and understand. And one of the things I try to emphasize, this is what I call the who knew factor. Because like when I was growing up on the east side, we didn't have a problem with ivy. It really wasn't a problem at all. And I mean, our home backed onto third growth forest and there wasn't a speck of ivy. Well, of course, that was like 60 years ago. And now that whole area is just covered with ivy. And so we didn't really realize how deadly it was to the environment. And the whole goal of getting rid of invasives is for biodiversity, for a healthy forest, and for mitigating global warming, which we now have a lot less time than we thought we had. I remember as a child going to the ice caves up at Mount Rainier. Do you remember that, Reed? I feel so lucky I got to see them. I mean, they're gone. Those glaciers are toast, as well as a lot of the glaciers all over the world, as well as the ice caps. So it is a lot more serious than even the alarmists are realizing it's a lot more serious than we thought it was. And so anything we can do on the island level is very important, because this is an environment where we can actually do something. I am going to be doing a research service project up on the Olympic Peninsula in the rainforest this summer, so I hope to be learning more, which I'm looking forward to that. So I didn't get through all the different presentations coming up. And this is sort of a wandering presentation. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you think I'm off track, feel free to raise your hand. We're a small group. But this one sounds exciting. The food waste presentation on Tuesday, April 27th, 5 p.m. The Climate and Energy Forum is going to be looking at the carbon footprint of food waste. We waste an enormous amount of food in this country. I mean, even just living here in a condo, I cannot believe all the food people throw out. You know, an entire loaf of bread, things like that. It's really fairly disgusting. There is going to be a tire and scrap metal recycling, big stuff. So Kitsap Solid Waste is hosting, they're calling it Wheels and Steel, free household recycling event from 9 a.m. to 1, April 30th and May 1st to the Thunderbird Arena on the Kitsap County Fairgrounds. So, you know, what to do with that old microwave or a freezer or tires. So I thought that that's notable and unusual. And then there's probably some other things that you all know about that aren't on this list. Bay Hay does styrofoam recycling twice a year. And I know a lot of people who have done renovations during the lockdown are sitting on a ton of styrofoam to recycle, and it hasn't been scheduled yet. But it will be. Things are really, really opening up. And I'm also working with, it's called a coordinated weed management area. So this is an exciting development for the island, because the island, this island will be our area, because it's a very specific area. Living on an island, we know the boundaries. And so we have the city, parks, land trust, weed warriors, watershed council, the schools, which actually have a lot of property and a lot of weeds. And who am I forgetting? Some other entity, but Islandwood for sure. The idea is that we will all work together to have an island-wide plan to prioritize which invasives are the most important to remove first, how to do it, how to work together so that we have a real impact. So I thought that was exciting. That's a new development, and that's moving along. Parks ran it by their lawyers who said, "Oh, this is great." I'm like, yay. So that's another project we're working on. Questions? I'm happy to take questions.
Quick question.
Yeah, Jeanette.
Oh, go ahead, Janet.
In the latter stage, what is Blodell involved? Because can you remember we talked to someone at Blodell?
Yes, Blodell is in the weed management plan. And although you don't see very many of them, there are a lot of invasives in the background. Ivy, you go back by the maintenance area, there's lots. And the weed warriors have worked out there, which is really fun. I mean, it's a lovely, lovely place and a great place to work. I'd also like to ask each of you a question. Pick out the weed you hate the most and tell me what it is. Let's start with Carolyn.
Oh, probably Stinky Bob.
Good choice.
For that, and I truly believe that somebody somewhere sold me this one, calling it Mexican mock orange.
Really?
Yeah, years ago. But when I pull it up, what am I going to do with it till I can find a place? We need to get the Bainbridge Disposal to have a trash can to take invasives to.
Well,
Or
I think,
somebody.
yeah, I think that's an important question. I also think it's important that we identify plants by their Latin names, because I can't imagine why you call it mock orange. I'm talking about the plant, it's in the geranium family, so it's called Geranium robertum. And the reason it's called that, I have a little story that I enjoy, is that Linnaeus in the 16th century or 17th, I didn't know this came out of the quiz, but when he was classifying all the plants, he had a good friend named Robert who had terrible body odor. So this was before deodorants, and he named it after his friend Robert. And so the plant we're talking about doesn't really look much like a geranium, but it kind of does. It has short stems. At the biggest,
Right.
it gets maybe this big, has pink flowers that
Yep.
have 5 petals. That's Stinky Bob. And I have to tell you another thing. It's an allelopath, which means it exudes a toxin that inhibits the growth of other plants, which is why it competes so successfully. It might be why it smells bad, because when you crush it, it smells bad. Stinky Bob, you can just put in your regular yard pickup, or it composts down pretty easily. This is a great time to get it before it sets seed. I have a lot of it in my old yard, and it only took me 2 years, because if you get it before it starts to set seeds and get rid of it, unlike Scotch broom, where the seeds persist for like 20 years, and I'm not kidding, Stinky Bob, the seeds don't last more than a season. So if you get it all up, you won't have any more.
Okay, but that spurge laurel, what do I do with that? Can I throw that in yard waste?
Yeah, you can put that in yard waste.
Okay.
The plants you cannot put, for example, the seeds of holly. You can separate the seeds out. This is what we do when we did the Christmas takedown of a holly tree, and then we distribute it for free and tell everyone, put the seeds in the trash. You can compost every bit of it, but the seeds. Scotch broom, after it sets seeds, after it has those little pea pods, don't put those in your compost.
Right.
And there's a big difference between city compost, the great compost in the sky that goes off to, I don't know, Bremerton or someplace, and your home compost, which may or may not get hot enough to kill seeds.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes,
thanks for asking.
My worst, well, I think what the worst plant is Scotch broom. And I realize in England it was always a joke. It's never as present as it is here, and I'm just amazed. I've lived on Bainbridge for 40 years, and it seems to have sprouted everywhere, whereas before it was just 1 or 2 plants. Because I used to be able to, in my garden, you could hear the seeds popping like a little gun, and they fly all over the place. And at one time they used to breed it for ornamentals, because you could get orange and yellow, and it was actually quite pretty for a while, but that seems to have gone by the wayside, thank goodness. But Scotch broom to me is just everywhere, and it's difficult to get rid of. I mean, you can get rid of it when it's tiny, but as it gets bigger, it's just harder and harder. It seems to me to be to be able to destroy it. Just west of the Ace parking lot, there's a huge field of Scotch broom, and it started blooming in February, which I thought was amazing that it was as early as that, and it just is now getting more and more, the more and more of the flowers are coming out. So I don't quite know what to do about that plot. I mean, I don't know who it belongs to, and you can't exactly go in and start pulling somebody else's weeds, but I'm just amazed how far the seeds are strewn in this explosion that the pods have.
Yes, and it can help to talk to the property owner. I know Ace Hardware has been very generous. They've given me free gloves and things for weed pulls, and they've paid people to cut down their Scotch broom. So it may be time to just talk to them again because I think the owner, it's a family-owned business, and Lynn Bile was friends with the owner, and he's sort of semi-retired now that he's had 2 knee replacements. But I think that people are more willing now to listen than they ever have been before. One of the questions I often get asked is, my neighbor's ivy is moving into my yard. What do I do about it? What do you do about it?
That's a tough one. Where I used to live, the neighbors were very easy to negotiate with, so that I had no problem with that. But where we're living now we're living in a condo. But I have to tell you that there's property around this big building that we live in. Scotch broom's starting to come up. We do not see Scotch broom around here, but somehow those seeds get all the way over here. And so every time Bob and I see one, we're pulling them out, because we know that if they go to seed, that we're dead in the water. But but that is a good question, is how do you approach your neighbors? And I think that you just have to be upfront with them and give them knowledge about it, and give them your email or phone number. Jeanette, no.
No, the Kitsap County Weed Board, they actually have a website where
and they do, yes,
share something and report it, especially if, the way the invasive weeds are classified. They have Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D. The weed board, the Kitsap Weed Board, makes that decision. Wendy Westerland, who is here on the island, is on the weed board, very knowledgeable botanist, and really, really good, solid people on that weed board. And so the A category of weeds are things that do great economic harm. For example, tansy ragwort, which can kill cattle, especially smaller, like llamas and goats and stuff. And also that we have a good chance of actually eradicating it. So, for example, one of the reasons dandelions aren't Class A weed is there's no way we're ever going to get rid of all the dandelions now. It's too late. Plus, they don't have a significant commercial impact. And so Japanese knotweed, giant hogweed, a lot of the poisonous plants, or just plants where they're really, really bad, but there is a chance we can get rid of them. We've been amazingly successful with Japanese knotweed. Do you guys know how we got to be so successful with knotweed?
How? Was that poison?
They did use herbicide, and it was amazing because herbicides on the island are very carefully regulated. You can't just go ahead and use as much Roundup as you want. I mean, people do, but it's still illegal. But especially like public property or roadsides, the only place that they use herbicides now are along 305, because that's not actually island, that's county. So they sent letters to everybody explaining about knotweed and saying that we were using herbicides. And the weed board, like Dana Kogan, thought that they would be inundated with protests. And at that time, we had such a visible, actual, obvious problem with knotweed completely like taking up roadsides, so you could not see who's coming around the corner, and taking up wetlands so that you could tell that it was just so destructive. Then people didn't protest, and they were very, very careful how they used it, and they used a special kind that was safe around water. And if you see any knotweed now, all you have to do is report it to Dana, and they will come get it. We have very little left. A couple months ago, I spotted some out in what we call the the Lost Valley, which is an interesting place, part of Bainbridge watershed. And I just spotted some, and I took a picture and reported it to Dana. And I went back the next week, and it was visibly dying from the herbicide. So they're very effective. We're fortunate to have a very good weed board. Who else didn't get to say what their most hated weed is? Reed, what's your most hated weed?
Himalayan Blackberry because it is so delightful. And so there's a season of the year that I love it, even though I know it's wicked, mean, bad, nasty, and it shows up all over the place and it's impossible. Well, maybe not impossible, but it takes some perseverance to get rid of it. And we've done that in our yard, but it doesn't stop me from, of course, loving it when I come across it on my walks.
Yeah, I think that's very well stated, because people say, oh, but I love to eat them. And one of the things I like to say is we will never run out of Himalayan blackberries, so don't worry about that. The other thing is that you can get rid of it by cutting it to the ground consistently, because it's such a heavy feeder. It exhausts all the nitrogen in the ground. So it's even better if you can pull it up with a weed wrench or a tractor or whatever you have. Pardon me, but if you just keep it cut to the ground, eventually it kills itself because it's eaten all the nutrients in that area. So that's kind of an encouraging thing to know. What are some other hated weeds? Laura, what weed do you hate the most? You're muted.
Hi, there's somebody up here doing one of those awful blower things.
Oh,
I don't know the name of it, but they're friends of dandelions. They're little weeds and they're really spiky. You know what I mean? They kind of grow in a little circle and it's like they're this incredibly aggressive little weed that hurts to pull out. I don't know what they are.
well, and there's a lot of weeds that fit that description.
Yes.
I use an app that's free. Let me see what it's actually called. Called Picture This.
Okay.
And of course, it's one of those things where then they keep trying to sell you the more expensive version, but you don't need the expensive version.
Good.
Take a picture of the plant.
Okay.
Janet and I have used this at Bloedel and been pretty satisfied.
Oh,
it's
good.
a source, so you don't always find out what you're looking for, but usually you do.
Laura was talking about the pokey plant. I think it's a thistle. Let's look at this.
Oh, yeah, it could be. Yeah, and thistles are, there's specific thistles that are non-native invasives.
Right.
And there's one native, but I can spot the invasive ones pretty easily.
Yes, that's it.
That's
Oh,
it.
yeah. Yeah. Bull thistle, and that's a noxious weed. Good job, Carolyn. Thank you. Yeah. So shovel, that's a good one for a shovel. Just want to cover just a few more things because I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot of plants that we are still distributing that are sort of kind of unrecognized knotweeds. So Vinca, you all know what I mean by Vinca? What's the familiar name? We found it in the forests now, and it's a terrible, terrible plant. So Vinca is an invasive species. Lamium, the vine that grows on the ground, a lot of times you'll get it in hanging baskets. It's another one of those plants. If people say, oh, it just grows like a weed, guess what? It's a weed. So a few of those garden ornamentals were just really kind of still, you'll see them for sale, especially like supermarkets. And I think reputable nurseries are a little more cautious, although you'll still run across them. But so just being aware of any plant that grows like a weed, watch out, keep an eye on it.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'll say a huge thank you to Jeanette. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to volunteer for. And we are all looking forward to being at the Senior Centre at 11 on April the 22nd with our gloves and our implements to have a huge weed pull to make the waterfront park so much better for us all and hopefully set a standard for the rest of the island.